So welcome everyone to our webinar today. It's on Halton Climate Collective, a whole community climate response through collective action. My name is Jorge Garza, and I'm a manager of cities within the Community Climate Transitions team at Tamarack. And I'll be helping with today's webinar, and I'm joined by my colleague Laura Schnorr, who is our director at Community Climate Transitions, and my colleague Jamie Steve, who is a community animator within Tamarack Institute. So yeah, we'll be here with you and the speakers throughout the journey. And before we look at the agenda of our webinar today, I'd like us to spend some time acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land, and as settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. This recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous communities has to be connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. I'm calling in from Jonjage, which sits on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, the Mohawk people. Jonjage is colonially known as Montreal. We're going to spend some time in a conversation with our colleagues at the Halton Climate Collective. Well, first they will provide a presentation about their amazing work, and then they will engage with us in a conversation and around the work that they're doing on collective impact with their communities. We will also look at a Q&A panel that we'll be having with them, and then in which we will be sharing some of the questions that you're bringing through the Q&A box. So again, please don't be shy and share your questions with us. And lastly, we'll have some closing words to wrap up our conversation today. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephanie, Trisha, and Suzanne, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. You can see I'm really excited that you're spending this time with us. Stephanie Bush is the Deputy Director at Halton Environmental Network. Trisha Henderson, she is the Climate Action Officer at the town of Oakville. And Suzanne Borwell, she's the Environmental Sustainability Specialist at Halton District School Board. Their full bios are available on our website, so we're going to be sharing with you the link to their bios shortly. And we'd like to say that the reason why we thought of organizing this webinar is because often we get asked, okay, so what are some examples of communities that are doing impressive work on collective impact and equity and climate? And we thought, well, Halton is great. The Halton community is doing so much there, so why don't we have a conversation with them? And it's important to mention that in the context of these discussions, our team at Community Climate Transitions, we were really interested in looking at what we call a whole community approach to address the climate crisis. And by that, we mean at collective impact. What are the lessons learned on building a collaborative governance framework that is looking at building a common agenda, but also a backbone infrastructure that supports collective efforts to advance towards a shared vision. So we're very grateful to have you with us, and we think that you have Stephanie, Trisha, and Susan, you have great work to that you can share with us today. Yeah. And so I'm going to pass it to Stephanie, Trisha, and Suzanne now, who will be presenting more details about their work with us. So it's over to you, team.
Thank you so much, Jorge. It's Stephanie here. So good afternoon, everyone. I think Jorge's going to advance our slides for us, and so that I think we've got a little bit of duplication as well, but we don't have too many slides in order to facilitate some discussion at the end and have some time for that. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. As was already stated, my name is Stephanie Bush, and I work at the Halton Environmental Network. For the sake of orientation for everyone who may be coming from different parts of Canada, Halton is a region just west of Toronto with 4 municipalities, including the city of Burlington, Halton Hills, Milton, and the town of Oakville. So again, I thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us as we share our experiences as a collective working toward local climate action. We like to start our presentations by acknowledging the land on which our Halton community resides. So on behalf of myself, Tricia, and Suzanne, as a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect all the creation gives to provide us with life. This includes the land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. The Anishinaabe peoples have utilized this land for millennia, and we would like to acknowledge their direct descendants, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land upon which we live, work, and conduct ourselves. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and these original peoples. Next slide. We also recognize that this land is rich in pre-contact history and customs, which includes the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and since European contact has and continues to become home for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And it is in the spirit and intent of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, whereby we will collectively care for and respect the land, water, animals, and each other in the interests of peace and friendship, and for the benefit of not only ourselves, but of our future descendants. Next slide, please. So the Halton Environmental Network, which is where I work and is more affectionately referred to as HEN, is the backbone agency of the Halton Climate Collective. Personally, I am new to this group, but HEN's previous executive director initiated the collective. So I'll be providing some of the context and background information about the HCC, but I'm also joined by two members of the HCC, Suzanne Burwell, representing the Halton District School Board, and Tricia Henderson, representing the town of Oakville. So I'd like to invite each of them to introduce themselves at this time as well. And I think, Jorge, I'm still seeing the land acknowledgement instead of the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, and I hope you get to the...
Suzanne and Tricia, I think we're each going to give a little introduction of themselves.
Okay.
So thanks, and good to see everyone here today. I'm Suzanne Burwell. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Specialist for the Halton District School Board. And I thought I'd take a minute to explain sort of what the Halton District School Board was. We are a mid-sized school board in the province of Ontario. We have schools, 102, maybe 103 facilities in all 4 municipalities of the region of Halton. We service provide K-12 education to roughly 65,000 students, and we have about 6,000 employees that we work with. So that's a little bit of a background on the Halton District School Board, and I'll turn it over to Tricia.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. So as mentioned, my name is Tricia Henderson, and I'm the Climate Action Officer for the town of Oakville. Stephanie briefly explained, but the town of Oakville does sit on the north shore of Lake Ontario and is home to about just over 190,000 residents. And as Stephanie mentioned, it is just one of 4 municipalities in Halton region. I've been with the town since 2006, and my main portfolio right now includes updating the town's climate resiliency strategy. I focus a lot on climate adaptation, and I am currently doing a series of climate risk and vulnerability assessments across the corporation to really identify the impacts that climate change will have both on corporate operations and the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia and Suzanne. That's great. So I also thought it might be a little helpful to give just a little context about the Halton Environmental Network. So HEN is a nonprofit organization in the community of Halton that strives to make the community a region with educated citizens, engaged stakeholders, and best practice policies for climate change mitigation and adaptation and environmental sustainability. So HEN has a range of programs and services that emphasize engagement, education, and action. And often these activities do intersect and overlap. And this slide just provides a description of some of our current programs. So a few years ago, our previous executive director attended a Tamarack training on collective impact. And in that couple of days, the idea for the Halton Climate Collective was born. So starting with a couple of already established relationships, an agreement to develop and grow the collective was initiated with HEN as the backbone agency. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent community organization with a primary focus on climate change mitigation and adaptation, this role really makes sense for HEN. Next slide, please. By using a collective approach, we could bring together several organizations to transform Halton into a low carbon, climate resilient community, a goal that the members of the collective all share. Next slide, please. So at this time, the HCC includes 11 organizations that represent multiple influential sectors, municipal and regional governments, education, and conservation. You can see here the breadth of representation from the community. By bringing these sectors together, we are including key local leaders who can really make an impact on climate change and lead to a more profound transformation. Each of the representatives are key personnel focused on climate change and climate action within their own organizations, and therefore bring a valuable lens to this collective work. Next slide, please. The power of a collective to bring actors from different sectors together to solve a complex social problem is exactly what is needed to address an issue such as climate change. By bringing together these representatives from these specific organizations, the HCC, or the Halton Climate Collective, is able to align with each other where possible, leverage expertise from different areas, and secure new funding opportunities, while also promoting organizational initiatives to support local action. So at this time, I'd like to pass it over to Tricia to tell you more about the journey of the HCC.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. If you could just advance the slide, please. So as mentioned, I'm just going to start with a quick history on the creation of the HCC. So as Stephanie did mention, back in the spring of 2017, a few members of the leadership team started to discuss and design a climate change-based collective impact concept for the community of Halton. We then received a Trillium grant and began to collaborate with the Tamarack Institute to learn more about collective impacts in general and the government's models that are used. The formal leadership team was then formed in the fall of 2017. And I believe if you just mentioned that we have 11 members right now, we maybe started with 8 or 9 at the time and have slowly grown with a couple more over the years. So our first HCC leadership meeting was in October of 2017. So really right after we secured the funding and got all of the partners on board, the initial partners on board. And at this meeting, we discussed governance again, what we had learned from the Tamarack Institute. We discussed some timelines and what the different goals of each municipality and organization was, and what the goals really needed to inspire this transformative change around the region. What those goals were needed to be. We began discussions on our theory of change, and again, what was important to each member of the leadership team and their respective organization, what we really wanted to get out of this collective impact. Liz Weaver from the Tamarack Institute helped us develop this theory of change through in-person meetings. We did attend Tamarack Institute conferences and over the phone every time we kind of just needed to reach out and get a little bit of help in defining our theory. The leadership team, through a series of meetings, we really felt that it was important to include both climate change mitigation and adaptation to ensure true climate resiliency across the region. The leadership team also felt that it was important to alert the community of the risks, of the observed risks that we've already noticed from our changing climate and from the projected risks that we face in the future. And from there, we developed our first draft of our theory of change. We then brought that into the community for input. And thankfully we did, because this is one of our major, I wouldn't say our first learning lesson in creating this collective impact, but it was definitely one of the major ones. We did learn by taking it into the community that we were just a bit off track in what we were thinking. So the leadership team did meet with over 100 stakeholders from the community, everywhere from business, the philanthropic community, youth, seniors, politicians, faith-based organizations, NGOs, local environmental groups, and such. We did this in January of 2018, and then they really helped us tailor our theory to ensure we were properly serving their needs and the community of Halton. Overwhelmingly, the stakeholders told us that the HCC needed to focus on educating, or needed to focus less on educating about the risks and to really focus on action-based and measurable initiatives going forward, and what actions the community can take and what the municipal and other organization partners are offering. to them. So the HCC, the leadership team, we did listen and we pivoted our theory to really include what the community had told us. We later then held 4, we were calling them charrettes, but individual stakeholder engagement sessions within each municipality so that we could tailor it even further and to really get a handle on what the needs and what the desire within each community for climate action was. And we did this over the course of 2018, the fall of 2018. The community through these charrettes told us that, they really did appreciate and love the green space and the connectiveness within the region. They felt that they were already doing a lot to curb their local emissions, but they were ready to do more. They just needed to know what. They were looking for great ideas, and they wanted to learn and have it demonstrated on how they could take more action and make more of an impact in their community. So that was very great to learn. I think overall we heard from over 300 community stakeholders, really just in the development kind of our theory and change and the purpose of the collective in general over the first year. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, they told us they really wanted to see programs and initiatives and communication coming from the Halton Climate Collective. So we took that input and we provided and developed some programs and initiatives using their input. So through the delivery of the following programs, the HCC has heard from approximately 5,000 community members. We've engaged over 1,200 youth. We have about 1,100 followers to our HCC virtual newsletter. And we have spoke, as I mentioned, directly with over 300 stakeholders in developing this program. Next slide, please. So one of the very first actions that the HCC took, one of our first initiatives, was to survey the community of Halton and to measure each community's emissions and to see what each community's appetite for climate action was. So the HCC completed the You Asked, We Measured campaign, as you can see there on the left side of the screen. And this was the first ever local greenhouse gas inventory to take place in Halton that really calculated emissions from residents' homes and personal vehicles. The data was collected through several reliable resources and all in partnership with the HCC leadership team and partners. Which was very helpful because we've all done community greenhouse gas inventories within our community and made corporate and community, reduction targets and things like that. But we haven't done it collectively as a group where we all exactly measure it the same and include personal vehicles. So that was really new for Halton, and we learned really a lot about our community. The second survey that you can see on the right-hand side was You Spoke, We Listened. And this survey was completed within the community, and we really wanted to learn what Halton residents were already doing to reduce their personal emissions and what they were willing to do, if the infrastructure and things were there and provided for them. So you can see by there, some would consider flying less if, their lifestyle were tailored that way or their job or things like that. And so it's not all we have done this or that we are completely vegetarian, but they would choose meat-free meals. They would make these efforts within the community. So for this survey, we heard from over 2,400 Halton residents. We used, HEN has a great resource of community volunteers and student volunteers. So for this, we went right into the community, and obviously it was before COVID, but we had volunteers going up to soccer games and talking to parents, at that type of venue, and then, to outdoor ice rinks and, to senior centers and things like that, so that we could really go right into the community and get their feedback and input at that point. So much of this information and the results of these two surveys were provided back to the community, obviously through our website, but also through an HCC Did You Know campaign, which was a social media campaign where we could just throw out these tidbits of information and actions that they could do to help mitigate some of these things throughout the year, which was very handy. and very digestible, I think, for the community receiving it back in that format. Next slide, please. And if you want to have a look at any of the infographics, I believe we provided the link to our website there, but we do have these infographics that you can take a look at closer, and some other ones of the roadmap of how we develop the HCC and things like that. So I have a look after our presentation if you desire. Again, how one of the initiatives that came forward as a kind of collective impact, something that we all did together and really leaned on each other for support for, was in 2019. Each of the 4 Halton municipalities and Halton Region and the Halton District School Board all declared climate emergencies, following hundreds of other global leaders, as I'm sure you know. The HCC website, as I mentioned, it does feature information on all of our climate emergencies and really kind of the different aspects of each. It's kind of a nice housing. The HCC website is kind of a nice place where we can kind of house all of the great information going on in Halton, kind of a one-stop shop for people that are interested. So the HCC team was able to delegate in each of the municipalities and at the region to the respective councils and show their support for the climate emergency declarations and for the support of what's going on community-wise in each of the municipalities. Although the basis and the reasoning behind each of these declarations were pretty much the same. We've seen the impacts, we know the impacts, we know we need to do something. Each one was actually quite different, and they really were very specific to the municipality or the organization in which they were declared. So, for example, the Town of Oakville's declaration had 6 key deliverables, very much related to urban planning, to asset management, to community action and safety. Well, say the Halton District School Board was one of a kind in Canada and was completely led by the student body. So I'm sure a lot of their key deliverables and objectives were quite different from the infrastructure that a municipality would be dealing with. So this is a perfect time. I am going to pass it over to Suzanne Burwell at this point. She can provide a little bit more detail about the student-led climate declaration, as well as a couple of the other initiatives that the HCC has tackled over the last couple of years. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Tricia. It was very interesting to work with the students to develop the climate emergency declaration. Very student focused. They recognize that, not only are they impacted by climate change, but they have a responsibility to take action on it. And a lot of the deliverables, as Tricia said, were, about listening to student voice, about involving students in choices that the board makes, not just from an education perspective, but also from other initiatives, and recognizing that students are doing great work. That was another piece of the climate emergency declaration. So moving forward, one of the initiatives, another of the initiatives of HCC is HCC Reads. And this, it sounds like it's just read a book, but it's so much more than that. It's read, listen, and ask, and take action. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The first year that we had an HCC Reads, we did use Drawdown as the focus point, and it was very much focused on solutions. Like, these are the solutions that are going to move us forward. And one of the things that we've learned over the course of the Climate Collective is that we need to be listening to how people want to engage with them, with us, with them, with each other, and between the organizations. So the second year that we started on looking at HCC Reads, students were very focused on the fact that climate change has a human rights, social justice lens that wasn't really being, addressed. When we look at so many things, people talk about greenhouse gas emissions, you're going to reduce those, it's going to have this impact. But it doesn't really look about the people part of the equation. So the second book that we read was The Right to Be Cold by Sila Watt Kluche. And she came in and did, well, she was going to come in, but then we had COVID. So we had a video presentation by the author talking about the impact of climate change on the North, and not just the impact of climate change on, the physical terrain, but also on the social and cultural fabric of the community. And we were lucky enough to engage with students, and we had, I think the first year we did this, we asked for students to read the book, watch the presentation, and submit questions. And we naively thought that we might get a few questions from students and some from the community, and therefore we would reserve 3 questions from the students. I think we had 2,800 questions from students. So we flipped that around and ended up with 8 or 9 questions from students that were submitted to the author, and she responded to them. And they were everything from, the questions about the mental health impacts of climate change, and how do I talk to people who don't necessarily agree with me? And, how do you feel that we should in the South be talking about the impacts of climate change up North? So it was great. The next year, students again are very involved in everything with the HCC. We're very lucky to have a large student voice, and the book that was chosen was Saving Us by Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. And one of the events, we just had this in the fall, was Dr. Hayhoe came in and talked to students directly, and then she gave a public presentation. And it's all about, how do you talk with other people? How do you find those common connections to start the conversations? And it was very respectful, find things that people care about. And again, students are stepping up and asking the questions that, show they're really engaged and willing to take action. Next slide, please. So one of the other initiatives of the HCC is Generation Green. And this was born out of attending a conference that was designed, billed as, it was a youth conference, and it followed a lot of the conferences that I have followed throughout my career, where I attend the conference, I sit in the audience, I listen to someone speak, and then I move on. And, it's not, if I choose to take something and implement it later, but there's not really any follow-up. So at one of those conferences, I had a conversation with students and said, is this interesting? Do you like this? What can we do better? And Generation Green came out of that. So Generation Green is designed by youth for youth, where students are given the tools and resources to actually take action. And take action they have. And the first year that we did Generation Green, we were in the midst of, I'm going to call it labor disruptions in the province of Ontario. So initially, it was thought, well, you could have this conference and staff, teachers could come with students to a conference. But even then there was that question about, well, who decides who gets to attend this conference if it's based on a school day? Does that power now reside with the teacher? Whereas how do we empower youth? Because this is a conference by youth for youth. So we chose to have it on a professional development day. And we had close to 200 students show up on a PA day or PD day and take part in the keynote, the workshops, and they learned the skills about how to track, measure, and report on a project. And that's the part which moves this whole unconference forward, is that students learn about how to take action, and then they create projects and move forward from there. And then they report back. And again, it comes back. So we look at, the impact of their actions over the years. So we had the first year, I think they reduced, their projects reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 20.3 tons. In the second year, again, challenges. It was COVID. It became a totally virtual conference. We had more students. I think we had 800 students involved the second year, and we the students reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 21.6 tons. This year, the students again, we've pivoted again, or shifted gears again. And I say that because this year, the theme that was chosen by students, and again, remember, these are all chosen by youth, is that we are driving climate action by driving less. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Right. So this year, it's very much about action that students can take, that youth can take on a very personal basis to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And it is associated with their transportation choices. So this year, again, we've shifted. We're starting off with webinars. The students will submit projects, they'll carry out the projects, and really, really hoping to have an in-person celebration event in April. So I'm keeping mindful of time. I think we're a little bit over, but we will say, if we go to the next slide. Thank you very much. And we are open for questions, or I'll turn it back over to Jorge.
Thank you, Suzanne, Tricia, and Stephanie for your reflections. Really, I mean, what we can see from what you've been sharing with us is just the rich work that you've been doing on multiple fronts to advance climate action, right? With always based on community leadership. I mean, we were talking from Tricia's work on with the greenhouse gas inventory to Suzanne, your work on youth leadership. Was it 800 students that you engaged in the second year? 800, right? Yeah, I mean, this is this is truly impressive. And what we like to do now is just maybe touch base on some reflections in relation to how the collective has helped you advance your work. So I think we have a good sense on from Hen's perspective and Stephanie's work, but I'm wondering if Tricia and Suzanne, if you could share with us about why you felt it was useful to come together as a collective, and what is the power of a collective approach?
Sure, I'll go first if you don't mind. The town of Oakville was one of the first members of the leadership team. We provided one of the first kind of letters of support to go forward with this. So we were really on board right from the beginning. We have a couple other, not collaboratives, but a couple other groups where we, meet on a bi-monthly or something basis and really, learn off each other and things like that. And this collaborative was a way to do that on a very local level with more than just municipal representatives as well. So I think finding the synergies, being able to, have a monthly touch point with the other organizations in our region that are doing kind of similar work really helps. The collaboration on the outreach and education efforts has been really helpful for us. I have a small department at the town of Oakville. We do every once in a while get to hire a couple summer students and things like that to help with some of these efforts. But having the consistent messaging going across the region and having the collaboration and the use of some of the volunteers and things like that has really helped the town of Oakville kind of push our climate messaging. Again, on the same point, having those kind of mutually enforced activities and measurements going forward really helps as well. I think Suzanne already mentioned, but the collective has opened up a couple doors for funding that maybe we weren't privy to on our own. So that's also helped a lot with this work. Very quickly though, and Suzanne might touch on it a little bit more, but Suzanne has some contacts at the town of Oakville per se, like say on say active transportation and anti-idling and things like that. And it really has helped kind of build some of the relationships that I have within the town of Oakville, just kind of having Suzanne as that kind of connecting point. And Suzanne's kind of pushing it from the school board point of view. I'm pushing it from the climate town point of view. And I think it really does help kind of break down some of those silos.
Fascinating. I mean, mutually reinforcing activities, these connections to break down silos. And I'm really intrigued about the piece on climate messaging and climate communications. I mean, we could talk about that for another hour, but I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Tricia. Suzanne, do you have any thoughts to share?
I think it's really important to really focus that a lot of times when we hear about greenhouse gas emissions, and Tricia talked about this. You know, the municipalities, we talk about the Green Energy Act in Ontario, where we have to report on, you know, the emissions from our buildings, that it very much seems to be in the realm of institutions or industries that are associated with this. And the Climate Collective is really about the people of Halton. It's really about engaging with the residents. And so getting, helping them to understand how they can take action. So from the school board's perspective, as I said, we have, you know, I'm trying to think whether it's 103 or 105 for soon to be, we're still a growth board, we're still building schools, but they're in all 4 municipalities. So it's great for us to have this way to meet with all 4 municipalities at the same time in the region and say, you know, how are we going to accomplish these goals, rather than, you know, each individual one trying to tailor, because to me, it doesn't really matter whether the school is in Oakville, Burlington, Milton, or Halton Hills. It's still a school, it's still about youth, and it's still about taking climate action. So it really helps from that perspective. And I think Tricia was saying, you know, we can build those relationships and working together, because the reality is there are, you know, slight differences between the municipalities, but we all are pretty much the same, and we have the same goal, but different ways of getting there. And I think that's really important to understand, that there are a variety of ways of achieving your goal, and that you need to be open to others, and we learn from each other in that collective as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on this. It's on the value of communities and looking at schools beyond just the building, right? And the youth that live there and the communities that come together in those spaces. Thank you. Fascinating. And thank you all for your reflections. We have now some additional questions that we'd like to explore with you, just to dig deeper on your collaboration in relation to the collective. So this one goes for Tricia. Tricia, what has this journey looked like for you as a municipal employee, but also as part of the collective?
So frankly speaking, I think like when we were first talking about the collective and first talking, I think we really thought we were going to be able to do one big thing together. There was an outreach and communication, but whether it would be like a green fleet strategy that's spread across the region, or even, you know, connecting transit across the region, or something around home retrofits or something like that. And then once, you know, we really all started talking and looking at our own work plans and our own kind of council and senior management priorities, we all realized we were doing a lot of really good stuff, but the priorities weren't exactly the same. So we weren't able to really kind of tackle one of those huge emission reduction projects per se. But this was all really in the initial stage. Once we really started developing our theory of change and really started, you know, talking to our partner organizations, and then obviously talking to the community, we really realized how we could have a huge impact. And, you know, I think we've done a great job in that sense. But I know at the beginning, there is a lot of talk about, like, let's do one big Halton wide project that's going to reduce emissions, and, you know, measure that and whichever. And then we really did kind of have to pivot and really look at what everybody had going on and how we could collaborate and find synergies within those work plans and priorities, and how we could work together. And a lot of that in the community told us was, you know, outreach, education, and action-based initiatives. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm conscious you spoke already about the work on collective impact in detail, but I wonder if you have any lessons to share with us on strengthening collaboration with local municipalities.
Really, I think it benefited us by starting out a little bit small. We still are talking about additional members and additional people we might like to have on the team, but I think it really is important to, you know, scope what your kind of purpose and objective is, and who is going to be able to provide the most, you know, meaningful input. You can always, you know, reach out to those additional stakeholders and things like that. later or on, on an as needed basis. But yeah, I really think the collaboration and reaching out into the community and seeing what was needed and where they saw the gaps really helped. The town prior to this was always like, the town of Oakville is doing this, and then Burlington would be like, and we're doing this. And now this is just provided kind of a more comprehensive approach. We can kind of see where we all are and kind of measure our successes against each other and learn off of each other.
Right, thank you. Oh, fantastic. And now I'm going to ask a question to you, Suzanne, if that's okay. This one is around what you mentioned on break and connecting with others through the partners, and that potentially helps break silos. So I wonder if you have any other examples on how the Halton Climate Collective has helped you with your work in breaking down silos with other organizations.
The one thing that we learned with the Halton Climate Collective is that people really want to take action, and they want to do it as a community focus. So those two initiatives that I talked about, HCC Reads and Generation Green, they really help to build those relationships. So when you look at developing those partnerships to help find the resources that you need to take action, I'm going to say when we look at HCC Reads, the books aren't always about like a specific item, but they touch many, many people. And that's the beauty of a book is, you can read it and get different pieces out of it and apply them in different ways. So it's great from that. Now, Tricia talked about the relationships, when we talk about Generation Green this year, the active transportation is the theme that the students have chosen. So HCC, we tend to have people from environmental portfolios in the group just because it's climate change. But when you start looking at active transportation, we're reaching out and we're talking with planning people, we're talking with traffic, we're talking with zoning people. And, I might reach out to somebody in the town of Oakville and say, this ties in with the initiatives and the goals of your climate department. And we've done that in several cases where we've had projects that we're pursuing and we're saying, by the way, we're accomplishing this goal here, but we're also accomplishing other goals of other departments. And that works the same for the school board as well. Whether it's increasing biodiversity and, resilience of our sites by changing how we look at them, or we're looking at how we select school sites and how we design them as part of a community. So that it improves the outcomes when you have more people engaged in achieving the final outcome, and when people can see themselves be involved in that outcome, they can see their goals reflected. Then you start building those relationships, and then it becomes easier the next time when you go out and say, well, we've got this, or they're more likely to come to you and say, I have this goal and I need your help. So let's work together to figure out what those synergies are.
Right, thank you. Thanks, yeah. An important reminder on engaging people throughout the process, right? And making sure the goals are reflective of community needs. Yeah, and then Stephanie, we also have a question for you, and I'm conscious of time, so try to be brief. So what's next for HEN in 2022? And I know you're coming from this amazing background in bridging social justice and community work, and also the climate space. What's next, and how are you integrating those inspirations from your background into what's next?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jorge, and I think a lot remains to be seen. But given the events of the past 18 months or so, even a little bit longer, I think the collective really needs to regroup in 2022. It's been a very challenging stretch. I think we've the three of us have really presented a very positive outcomes of the collective so far. And we had some really great successes in those initial stages. But to be honest, when the pandemic struck, it really impacted, I'd say it really impacted our momentum and redirected the attention of many of our members to other priorities. And I think, you know, that kind of made sense given the severity of the issue. But I do wonder if this has also led some of the organizations to be working again more in silos. And I think we'll need to do some work really to rebuild some of those partnerships and find new alignments and a shared project to reignite that collective work. It is an ongoing journey. It's definitely not short-term work, but we are committed to reducing our emissions in Halton and making an impact and to doing that together. So as a community that emits a lot of greenhouse gases in a country that emits a lot of greenhouse gases, we do have a bigger responsibility to act, and to do so in a collective is more likely to drive that transformation that we need. So in our community, we are in the process of completing a new inventory. So we talked about the inventory that was done a few years ago, but we are providing an update to that. And that those updated emissions will help inform some of our next steps. And of course, as a collective, the next steps will be decided together, and we look forward to doing that work in the new year. So it's really not about one organization or one entity. It's about creating space to come together and work collectively. And so we will take all of those, you know, all of the learnings over the last few years into consideration moving into 2022 and see where it takes us.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. So I guess this is a perfect point for us to transition into then the final round of questions, which are coming from our community who joined us today. So I wonder if we have any questions from our participants. I want to stop sharing my screen now. So let's look at that.
I did get one question. I don't know if everybody did, that I answered in the chat there.
Right. Yeah, the one from, yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you. We're saying it. Okay, so this question is from Brady, who are the people and communities most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change in your region, and how are you involving them? Okay, great, Tricia. Yeah, Town of Oakville's already climate resiliency program designed to help vulnerable populations and areas of town and mitigate and adapt to climate change through a series of initiatives. So yeah, and you added a link there for us to look into it. Thank you.
And when we did our stakeholder engagement and our charrettes, we did try to have representation of all demographics and groups and nonprofits and things like that. So, you know, we did include food banks, nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, things like that, so that we really did hopefully get a deep dive into the community and some of the vulnerable populations within each of those communities. But for Oakville specific, we do have another program tailored just for that.
Great, thank you.
That we work with Hen on.
Okay, so we actually have a question here in the chat box. I'm gonna bring it up. Oh, and I am seeing another one. Okay, so I'll go with I saw first this one in the chat box, so I'll go to that one. It says, doing work at the local level, have you seen any other similar collectives across Canada or elsewhere who have helped lead the way? Have any other organizations looked up to you this way?
I believe when we got started, we looked to a lot of the collectives that were based around, there was a lot of around poverty and vulnerable populations and things like that. But at the time, we did not have a climate related one to kind of look up, to learn from at that point. But we did learn a lot from some of the Tamarack Institute's other collectives that were taking place at the time.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and there's another question here for the group from Lee. It says, how do collective members stay in touch between meetings? Email, Slack, and is there a platform for doing that?
Mostly email, but we also work with each other on a bunch of variety of projects. So I don't think keeping in touch has been too much of an issue. But it's just all pretty much through work email. And some of us have each other's numbers and text if it's needed, but primarily email.
I would just like to add to that, that it's really important to have a backbone agency in the collective. And HEN certainly has provided some of those connections and resources, and because they are so connected about what's going on in other places, that it might be where someone would reach out to HEN and, you know, the answer is, well, have you talked to this? And once you have all those relationships, I said that, you know, as a school board, we might participate in all different regions. And I very clearly remember sitting in one municipality saying, have you talked to Tricia?
Yeah.
And they were like, actually, we have a meeting with her next week. So those relationships are developing, but it really is important for the structure of the collective to have one backbone agency that really does make sure that the meetings happen, that sets the agenda, that all those pieces come together.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and just a reminder to our audience that you can find a lot of resources around collective impact and backbone agencies through our Tamarack website as well. So if you go through the list of resources, you'll be able to find out more about it. But thanks for that important reminder, Suzanne. Yeah. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I have one final question just to close our conversations, and it's around what advice would you give to others who are looking to implement local collective action to advance a just and equitable climate transition? Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in first. I would say that, you know, recognizing that different stakeholders have different viewpoints, and that, you know, there's so much wealth of knowledge out there, and there's the idea that people, you know, there's no one right way to accomplish your goals, and that, you know, it comes from different places, and that we have to be really cognizant of that when you start promoting solutions to climate change, that not all of them are equitable. I think, Tricia, you mentioned a bit about, you know, deep home energy retrofits. That's a great example of actions that people can take, but not always open to all members of your community, different things like that. So it's really important to bring in that variety of voices, and youth and are a source of inspiration in many ways, and they have a different way of looking at things, which is great because it shakes us up. But another large segment of our community has been very involved. I would say, Stephanie, is some of the older members of our community who are very, very keen to take action, and they have a different ability to take action than our youth do.
Any final words, Stephanie and Tricia?
No, I was just going to say what Suzanne said. She mentioned, you know, really reaching into the seniors and the youth. But yeah, I think we learned a lot when we went out into the community within the first kind of year and a half to 2 years. And then, like Stephanie said, there's been a lot of change with staffing and commitments and priorities and things like that over COVID. So we'll learn more next year, I'm sure.
Yeah, I would just reiterate persistence as well, right? It's as I said, it's not short term. It's something that is a longer term commitment, and even through all of these changes, keep working at it, keep communicating, and keep connecting, and finding some kind of shared project that brings everyone together. That you know, even if it's not a big project, but something that brings everyone together to move things forward and keeps people motivated.
I think it's important too to, you know, be dynamic, to be, you know, not doing the same thing over and over again. But before you take that step into something new, to take a step back and say, does this meet, you know, is this helping us accomplish our goal? Does it meet, does it fit with our theory of change? So that you don't get diversified and off in too many directions, but that you're okay to have different different activities and to target different sectors of your stakeholders too. Like there are things that appeal more to one group than to another.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. And so as you were, the three of you were speaking, I was taking notes because I'm going to take into account your advice even for day-to-day work. Thank you for that.
Great. I just saw in the chat about Finger Lakes Collective. I'll have a look at that website after. Very interesting, Brady. Thanks for providing the link.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, if we have no other questions, and I'm just saying that we're perfect, we're on time. So maybe just some last minute, some final announcements that we will be sharing a recording with everyone, and also within a follow-up email that will contain some highlights from our conversation. And we'll also share a link to the deck that we presented today so that participants can access it as well. And yeah, also an invitation for everyone to sign up to our Climate Transitions newsletter, where you can find out more information about upcoming events in the new year. And that's it. So we're so grateful to have you with us today. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to my colleague Laura or myself, Jorge. We're going to be adding our email addresses in the chat box. And thank you. And I hope everyone has a great time with their families as we prepare for the holiday season. And thanks for learning with us today. And thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.